Hello, and welcome to the iJSEC ATP Cloud demo. So let's go ahead and log in to this SRX device and get things going here. All right, so we're in the basic settings section, and this SRX device, the first thing we'll do is we'll go to ATP Management Workspace, and we'll start the enrollment process to get this enrolled with an already created security realm with ATP Cloud. And here in the ATP Enrollment Workspace, you have the option to specify a proxy profile, and we're not going to be using anything proxy related, so don't have to worry about that. And then it's as simple as clicking the Enroll button and then filling in the necessary information. Now, something here that's really cool is in the past, if you didn't have a security realm, you had to manually go to the ATP Cloud web interface, create a security realm, find the enrollment link, paste that in here, and get it started. This is a little easier. You can just create the realm from here, specify the realm location, and give it some of the necessary parameters, such as the password, the email, and the realm. And so with that, we're not going to create one. I already have one created. We're just going to enroll this VSRX device with a security realm. And so to begin, we're going to enter in the email, specify the password, and then specify the realm. Then clicking OK starts the process, and you can see here that it shows ATP enrollment is in progress. Now this is going to take probably around 3 to 5 minutes, so I'm going to pause the recording and start it back up again once the enrollment is complete. All right, the enrollment is complete. You can see up top, you see SRX device is successfully enrolled with ATP. So that looks good. And then if we look through the logs here, we can find this as well. You see device enrolled successfully. And so that's what you want to see. Now, if you wanted to remove the device from the ATP Cloud security realm, we could select the unenroll option. And if you do that, it wants you to put in the information for the realm, and then you click OK, and it would run the unenrollment script. And we don't want to do that, so let's go ahead and move on. And so with that, if you did have problems with enrollment, you could click on Diagnostics up here under ATP Management, or we could click on the Diagnostics link here to troubleshoot. So I'm just going to click on the link. Notice it takes us to the Diagnostics workspace, and then we can expand Diagnostics, and you can run the Diagnostics operation, and we can select the realm first, or the region first. And we're going to stick with North America and click Run Diagnostics. And then you see the fetching diagnostics logs for advanced anti-malware service. This takes a couple of minutes, so I'm going to pause the video again. And as soon as this is done, we'll have a look at the logs. Okay, so the diagnostics command is complete. It's a little hard to see because it's kind of light gray, so I'm going to highlight it here. And you can see that everything looks good. Everything is okay. Nothing showed failed, and so things are working good. And it does tell you at the end to make sure you have a SkyATP license. Just a friendly reminder. There is a SkyATP license applied to this device, so that's not telling you that you don't have it, just a friendly reminder. But if you failed any of these, it could help lead you in the right direction to fix it. For example, we see the MTU check here. If the MTU check was too small, then it would let you know here. And that could be something you could check. And it shows you the URLs it reaches out to with the ports that it uses. If any of that failed, it wasn't reachable, then you could chase down that problem. And then at the bottom here, we have, well, I'm going to shrink diagnostics. Check connectivity. This is a very useful parameter to make sure that SkyATP is functioning correctly. So let's go ahead and click check. You can see the server details are filled in. Shows the server host name, the realm, the port, the connection plane statistics, as well as service plane and other details. And something that's really important here is the connected status for the connection status. And if that shows something else, you definitely have a problem. And you could start seeing problems where you are not submitting files correctly, or the SRX device is not submitting files correctly. And so this could be you're losing the connection status. And so this is something you could check if you're having problems. So with that, let's go ahead and jump to the ATP Cloud web interface and have a look at things from there. Okay, so here is the ATP Cloud web interface. Let's go ahead and log into our realm. Okay, so here is the dashboard, and on the dashboard, there's a lot of good information. You'll see a bunch of widgets here that are interactive. And the first widget I want to point out is here on the left, the CNC server and malware source locations widget. And here it shows the different locations that CNC servers are residing or malware locations are at. So the source for both of those. So it'd be the servers and the malware source. And you can hover over individual countries like the USA. You can see if there's anything from there. Now, I'm not doing anything CNC related, so you're not going to see anything populate here. But you are able to see where the malware is coming from in the world, or the CNC servers. By default, like I said, it just shows the CNC servers. Now we can switch to malware source locations. And again, you're not going to see anything here because this being a lab, all my malware source locations are coming from private IP addresses. And so there's nowhere to show on the public IP address map. So you won't see anything here, but if you did, you would see individual countries. Like here it shows 0 based out of the United States or in the United States. If there was stuff coming from there, that would be more than that. And then you have the threat count legend on the side. You can see where everything's coming from. It will be color coded, so you'll see that there once that starts filling in on this map. And then you can adjust the timeline as well, 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, and so forth. And then you have other widgets like the top infected file categories. You can see here we just have a bunch of executable files, and you could change from low threat to medium to high threat. And again, there's a timeline as well. And then you have the top scan file categories. Again, it's only executable files. You have a timeline you can adjust. And then you have your top compromised hosts. Okay, so which hosts are doing the most bad things? And these individual hosts, you can select them. For example, if I select host right here, this 129.1.101, it takes us to the host page for that host and gives us a bunch of information for that host. Now, I'm not going to explain this right now because I'm going to explain this later as we go through the monitor section. But I do want to show you what we have here. We can select on the individual files and then find information about the files. But again, I'm not going to go through that right now because we are going to go through that later. So let's go back to the dashboard. And here in the dashboard, you also have the top identified malware. So top malware identified widget as well. And you can move these around. You can create your own dashboards. You can place the widgets where you want and go from there. So it's very customizable. So let's have a look at the devices workspace. There's the monitor workspace, but I'm saving that for last because that's going to be where you spend most of your time. So let's look at the devices workspace. And this is going to show all the devices that are currently enrolled in your ATP Cloud realm. And so let's select VSRX2. You can see the information here, the version number, the VSRX, so the OS version, the model number, the serial number, device name, submission status, things like that, some configuration information, some connection type information. Not a ton of information here, but a decent amount of information. And something else you can do here is you can manage the devices here. If you want, you can do a device lookup. You can disenroll devices from here. Now, the enroll and disenroll buttons here, this would be more for the CLI. For example, if I select enroll, it gives you a command that you can enter in the CLI. And same thing with disenroll. But we can also select devices and just delete them from SkyTP. Say there's some still devices in your SkyTP realm. Say those devices were factory reset, sent somewhere else. So you can't just unenroll them from the JWeb or the CLI. You can go in here and just click the trash can button here, the delete button is with the device selected to get rid of it. All right, so let's look at the configuration workspace. Here in the configuration workspace is where you can configure ATP Cloud related features. And the first thing that it drops you into is the file inspection profiles workspace. And in this workspace, you have the ability to define file inspection profiles. And what does that mean? Well, whenever you are scanning files with an SRX device, you need to specify which type of file types you want to scan. And by default, there's the default profile. And if we expand that, we can see it's document files, executable files, library files, and PDF files, all up to 32 megabytes. And that is not editable. You can't change that profile since it is the default profile, but we can create a new profile and we can name it. We can specify which file types we want to scan. And there's 3 different options. There's the do not scan. There's the scan files up to a max size, and it can go up to 32 megabytes. And then there's the hash lookup only, which says right in there, not recommended. Now, what does this do? Well, the hash lookup only does hash lookup on the files. And so what does that mean? Well, you have a file that comes in. There's a few different things that happen. One of those things is the hash of the file is taken and then sent to ATP Cloud. And with that, ATP Cloud can look at that hash and see if it's a known malware or it is known goodware. And so it's a very quick process. Nothing is sent to the cloud other than a hash. No files or anything is sent to the cloud. And so it's a quick way to do it. But why it's not recommended is it can't detect unknown malware. If the malware is unknown, that file has to be sent to ATP Cloud, and we have to sandbox it to figure out if it is actual malware or not. So we can't do that. So it's not recommended because you're kind of reducing the effectiveness of ATP Cloud by doing this. However, there are certain circumstances where you may want to do this. For example, if you have an organization that has a policy that says you cannot send files to the cloud. Certain government organizations will have that type of policy. And so in this case, you can still use ATP Cloud, just not a fully featured ATP Cloud. So that option is there for that reason, but it is not recommended for a very good reason. So I'll go ahead and cancel that. We don't need to create a new profile. And then under email management, this is where you would configure the different SMTP and IMAP parameters. That is outside the scope of this course, but I do want you to know where it is. So if you are configuring a threat prevention policy and you need to configure email protection, this is where you do it. And then we have the allow list and the block list. Pretty self-explanatory. Something in the allow list will always be allowed. Something in the block list will always be blocked. And then we have the adaptive threat profiling section. And what this is really cool. I love adaptive threat profiling because it allows you to organically create your own feeds for your network. And how does that work? Well, say you have multiple SRX devices that are participating in an ATP Cloud realm, and one device detects a threat, and you specify what type of detection happens. I don't want to go into too much detail since this would be really outside the scope of this course, but that information is then distributed into a feed, an adaptive threat profiling feed, and then that is distributed to your other SRX devices. So it's a really cool feature. Then we have the second tell feeds workspace, and here you can see the Juniper second tell feeds, third-party internet services, third-party IP threat feeds, as well as third-party URL threat feeds. Then global configuration, where you can configure the infected host global parameters. You can set the threat level threshold, and then you have the email alerts for infected hosts. You can set that out at a certain threshold level. Then we do have some logging and some threat intelligence sharing and some proxy servers configuration, some rel management, and some MIST configuration. Now, the rest of that is definitely outside the scope of this course, but I do want you to know where this stuff is located in case you need to find it in the future. All right, so there's the reports workspace where we have the different report definitions and also the generated reports. And then we have the administration workspace where you have your profile. So this is who I am logged in as. You can change the password, change the email, things like that, change your name if you want. Then you have your users. So these are the users that are part of this realm. And then multi-factor authentication, you can enable it here. Highly recommended to do this. Application tokens. Okay, so this is where you specify application tokens so you can use the API for devices to communicate with ATP Cloud. One great example of this is Juniper Policy Enforcer. And then we have some single sign-on settings that you can set up as well. And so with that, let's go ahead and go back to the monitor workspace and dive into probably the biggest section. And as a ATP Cloud administrator, you'll be spending most of your time here. And so the first thing you see is the host workspace. And in the host workspace, you see all the hosts that have submitted files and what's happening with them, that is. And so you have the host identifier, and by default, it's just going to show an IP address. If you have something like Gibbs set up or integrated user firewall, that can be different. And so it gives you the host IP, the threat level. You know, obviously 10 is bad. You can see up top, you got high, medium, low, none, clean. And so 10 is high, and 10 is actually the highest you can have. So if a host is at 10, it's going to be blocked. And it's going to be included in the infected host feed. You can see here, you see the last activity, the CNC hits, the malware hits. These hosts are only hitting malware, no CNC. Then you have the policy, which shows to use configured policy. So that's the policy that you've configured on the SRX device. State of investigation, all these are set to open. That can change, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then we have the source. Where did this come from? It was a detection, a malware detection. Okay, so with this, if you were to select a host, you can do some things. You can set the policy override. Notice how the policy down here is set to use configured policy. Here we can set it to never include it in the infected host feed or always include the host in the infected host feed. Now, why would you ever want to change that? Well, if you have, say, a server, it's got a special application on it, and it's constantly tripping ATP Cloud, you may want to set this to never include that specific server on the infected host feed. Now, you got to be careful with that. The server could get infected in a later date, and so you want to be careful when you use that. Or you could always include a host. say you know there's a bad host out there, you'll always want to include it. And you could do that until you make sure it's cleaned and then set it back to use configured policy. So with the set investigation status button, you can change the state of the investigation. By default, when it gets put on the infected host feed, it's set to open. You can see all these hosts have an investigation status of open. We can change that to in progress. Okay, so what does that do? That still puts them on the infected host feed or leaves them on the infected host feed, but it lets any ATP Cloud administrator know that it's being looked at. And so that can be good for you if you come back to it and see, okay, I've started to look at this one, or another administrator. And then we have the resolved options, false positive, fixed, and ignored. And all of those take it off the infected host feed. And you might ask yourself, well, why false positive, fixed, and ignored if they all do the same thing? Well, it's a way for you as an administrator to kind of log what you did. Did you fix it? Was it a false positive? Or did you decide to ignore it? So all that will change the host here. The resolved will change the host and take it off the infected host feed. And so let's go ahead and click on an individual host and see what we can see. Okay, so here we saw this earlier, but let's talk about what this is. The host identifier by default is the IP address. If you're using something like integrated user firewall or Gibbs, then this could be different. It might fill in that information. But manually, you could just change it if you like, and that can be helpful in tracking down who is using what here. And so you can see the host IP, the MAC address. If you have Policy Enforcer, this information can show up. We're not using Policy Enforcer here, so it's not going to show up. The host status shows as a high threat level. Recommend blocking, investigating. That makes sense. And then investigation status. We talked about this on the previous page. It's the exact same thing here. And same thing with the policy override for the host. We can change the policy and the investigation status at this point for an individual host, or you can change it on the other page for one host or multiple hosts. Okay, so we do have a time range of what's happened. It shows you how things have changed with different events. We see a malware hit, another one a little bit later, another one, and another one. And you can see how it steps up. It was at a 7 with the first malware hit, jumped to a 9 with the next one, and then after a few more, let's put this at a threat 10. This user's downloading a lot of malware at this point, right? And so that put that up to a threat 10 because the user downloaded multiple malware in a very short time frame. And so with that, we go to the bottom, we can see the individual malware hits and what happened. For example, this last one, host attempted to download a malicious file, score 7. And then additional analysis updated to a 10. And same thing, 7, updated to a 10. And so, yeah, this is definitely something to be concerned about. We can select these individual links to find out more information about that file. And I'm not going to go into detail here because I want to save that for a little bit later. But let's go ahead and go back to the hosts. And you can see the individual hosts here. And you can filter the host and search for individual hosts as well. So the threat sources would be the next section. And this is what you see in that map, that widget on the dashboard. I'll just jump back there real quick. You'll see here, anything that's shown up here will show up in that threat sources section. And if you actually click more details in this widget, then it takes you to the threat sources workspace under monitor. And so that's why you're not seeing anything here because there's nothing to show up on the map since I'm doing this all inside of a lab. And so let's go back to file scanning now, and then HTTP file downloads. And that takes us to all of the files that have been downloaded. And you see a bunch of 10s here. You see nothing but 10s. But notice at the top, you see this threat level greater than equal to 7. So we're only seeing 10s right now because we're not seeing anything that wasn't malware. So let's go ahead and get rid of that. And then you'll see other files that were downloaded that were benign files. 1, that's a really low score. More than likely it's clean. There's no problems with the actual file itself. But one of these other files that are 10, that's definitely a huge problem. So let's go ahead and select one of these files. And let's go through what is actually happening here, what we're seeing here. Up top, you're going to see some summaries. You're going to see the threat level, see a big 10. That's really bad, right? The file name, category, top indicators, and also prevalence and how bad it is. You know, unique users, there's 21 unique users who downloaded this. That's really bad. Really high global prevalence, and as well as the signature match, the name, and things like that. And we can go into the general section here, and we're going to see some additional information, but mainly what we see in the summary. We see a 10, global prevalence is high when it was last scanned. The file information, we see the file name, the category, the size of the file, platform, malware name, the type, as well as the strain, and other details. You see the SHA-256 hash as well as the MD5 hash. Now, something interesting here, the SHA-256 hash. If we were to go back to the configuration part and go to the allow list or the block list, you'll be able to see an option to block based on the hash or allow based on the hash. This is where you get that information. This is the hash right here that you could use for that. Obviously, this being a threat level of 10, you probably wouldn't want to put it on the allow list, but this is where you get that information. The individual SHA-256 hash, you can get this and use that in those lists. And then you can see the HTTP downloads. You can see the hosts that downloaded it and when they did it and the device that the detection was found on. And you can click on the device here. That takes you back to the device section for the individual SRX device. And also the host will take you back to the host and so forth. And so with that, we have some other sections too I want to talk about. We have the behavior analysis up top here. And this will give us some information on what the actual malware is doing. This is really cool. I love being able to see the details of what this malware was trying to do. And so you can see just a pie graph here of what's going on, gives you a really good idea of how bad it is. And then if you scroll down, you can look at the individual behavior and see what it was doing. So persistence, attempts to install new root certificates to gain access. That's really bad. So we see it at a threat level of 9. Fine-grained behavior, checks host file and opens for reading. That's bad, but that's not nearly as bad as that first one, so we'll get a 6 for that. Networking, memory contains social media addresses. Fine-grained behavior, again, reads self. And so you can go through here and find out exactly what that malware file is doing and find out why it was rated as high as it was. And then we select the network activity section, and we can see the contacted domains, contacted IPs, as well as the DNS activity. And then we look at behavior details. We can get a little more information on what it tried to do. It tried to start this exe file, this malware file tried to start itself. It dropped desktop INI, then these temp files as well. And then it started command exe. Then it also started fastbat sys. So this is some pretty bad stuff, and you're able to find out exactly what it's doing. And then on the left, you can see email attachments. If there were some malware downloaded in email attachments, you'd see it in this place. We're not seeing any here because I'm not doing any sort of email scanning. Same thing with SMB file downloads. And then the manual upload section allows you to upload files to ATP Cloud and have ATP Cloud scan it. Okay, so then the next section, we have encrypted traffic. This is for encrypted traffic insights, and this is awesome. What I love about this is you're able to, if you enable this feature, you're able to look at encrypted traffic streams without decrypting or re-encrypting the traffic streams. Because normally what happens, for example, if you're looking for malware in an encrypted traffic stream, you would have to decrypt the traffic, look at the file, scan it, and then re-encrypt that traffic stream. That is incredibly resource intensive, and it's unfortunately necessary to look at most web files, most possibly malware files that are contained in encrypted web traffic, that is. However, with encrypted traffic insights, you can use this as another layer to help you find malicious files and malicious traffic streams. So keep that in mind. This is really useful. Definitely outside the scope of this course, but I do want to mention it here. Then we have DNS section, which allows you to see any sort of DNS DGA or DNS tunneling attacks. Then blocked email, so this will be any quarantine SMTP emails and IMAP blocks. And then here's the audit log, shows enrollment, disenrollment, logins, things like that. Just kind of an audit log, what's happened with the security realm. And then we have the telemetry section, and this will tell us where we're getting telemetry from web protocols and also email protocols. And we go to web protocols. You can see on VSRX1, we've got scan files, block files, permitted, ignored, and things like that. And so that's where you'll find those statistics. And so now let's go ahead and jump back to the JWeb interface for VSRX1 and have a look at some statistics and some configuration options that deal with ATP Cloud. Okay, so here is the JWeb interface for VSRX1. So let's go ahead and log in. So here we're dropped into the device administration workspace, and we need to go to monitor and then statistics and then threat prevention statistics to find those statistics that we're looking for with ATP. And here, the first section is advanced anti-malware session statistics. Go ahead and select HTTP as well, since that is what we're scanning. And you can see here the different sessions. So we have 315 HTTP sessions blocked, 78 sessions permitted, and nothing currently active. And if we go to the bottom, we can see security intelligence session statistics. And then we don't have anything CNC related configured right now. So let's go ahead and look at the infected host statistics. And let's go ahead and select all this. And you can see here that we have total, whole bunch. What was that? 219,375. and then dropped a little over 100,000, and then nothing blocked closed. And so you can see that statistics. We can also clear the statistics from here if necessary. So the next thing I want to show is the configuration of an advanced threat policy. So let's go to the security services workspace and then advanced threat prevention. And here is our policies for advanced threat prevention. And we have one configured right here. These are the defaults, the CNC log only and the default log only. That's going to be there by default. But this is the one that I created earlier. And we can expand this. We can see the CNC server configuration, the infected host configuration, and the malware HTTP configuration, as well as the logging. And so let's go ahead and select that policy and then edit it. And I'll walk you through the different parts of the policy itself. And so here in the policy, we have the profile section. Of course, you got the name at first, but we already named that. And then we do have the actual profile section. And we have a couple different things. We have the include CNC profile policy that's selected. And here we can define one threat score per feed or per multiple feeds or only one threat score for all feeds. And so here we have the default of define only one threat score for all the feeds. And here we're permitting 1 through 3 and blocking 4 through 10. And then we have some different actions we can select. The drop connection silently is recommended, but you do have a list of other actions you can select as well. And then in the include infected host profile in policy, this allows us to, if the host is on the infected profile, and it reaches a certain threat score, then we're going to drop it. The CNC profile policy means that if a host on your network, let's just back up a little bit, if a host on your network attempts to contact a CNC server and it's anything 4 or above on the threat score, then we're going to block that. And so with this one is the infected host profile policy. If a host is on the infected host feed and it's 6 through 10 as far as the threat score, then we're going to block it from communicating through the SRX. And then the last action is include malware profile policy. Okay, so what this does is what are we going to do if malware comes through? Well, if it's 1 through 6, we're going to permit it. And if it's 7 through 10, we're going to block it. And the action drops connection silently is the only thing. Same with the action in the infected host profile in policy. That's the only option. And then we can log it if we want. And then we also can enable SMTP attachment here. And notice how it says here, enforcement actions are set in ATP. So where I showed you the configuration for email related stuff, that's where you would actually configure it. And then logging, do not log any traffic, or we have log all traffic or log only block traffic. So I'm just going to cancel that since we don't need to change that. And then the last thing you need to do is you need to configure the security policy rule. And I have a security policy rule already configured. And we have the different parameters from zone to zone, things like that. But where you would actually set this threat prevention policy is under advanced security. And one thing I do want to point out is the action has to be permit for you to set the threat prevention policy. So if I click on this, we can see how this is set. We have the threat prevention policy that we created earlier set here. And something else I do want to point out is if this is going to be in a production environment, you do want to configure an SSL proxy profile because that will de-encrypt the traffic, allow ATP Cloud to scan the files, and then the traffic can be re-encrypted. And so without that, it's going to be really hard to examine any sort of encrypted traffic. Now, with that being said, you do have the encrypted traffic insights feature that will detect malicious encrypted traffic streams, but it won't detect it all. So that's definitely a good part of it. But if you're going to be using this in a production environment, you definitely want to be using an SSL proxy profile. All right, so that does bring us to the end of this demo. As always, thanks for watching.
Visit the Juniper Education Services website to learn more about courses. View our full range of classroom, online, and e-learning courses. Learning paths, industry segment and technology-specific training paths. Juniper Network's certification program, the ultimate demonstration of your competence. And the training community, from forums to social media. Join the discussion.